We're going to crack into the theory of lighting now. The first place to get started with that is your fixtures and modifiers. The fixture is basically just the name for where the light is emitting from. So a bulb is a fixture. I've got a lovely FS200 light over here, and sort of that is the light fixture itself. I've also got two practicals behind me, which we're going to dive into a second. Those are also considered fixtures. There's a whole lot of different fixtures. I want to quickly dive into them, even though today in the sort of low budget indie world, we're primarily dealing with LEDs. We've come through tungsten lights and HMIs and fluorescents, and they have all held a really important place. They still do today, but they're primarily found in a higher budget environment. LEDs have the most flexibility and versatility out of any light fixture available, pretty much. But they do lack out on some key features from some of these older light sources. So looking at tungstens first, they're a really great light that have been around for a very long time. I was even using them a couple weeks ago on a shoot. We had these really large tungsten fixtures. Beautiful, beautiful light that's very warm straight out of the gun without too much modification. You'll find them on a lot of traditional film sets. They can exist in quite a small form as little redheads, or you can go up to much larger fixtures. Big issue with tungstens is they have a very high draw on power. So sometimes your household circuit won't be enough to power a tungsten. You might need a much larger power draw. And the other issue is they can actually get really hot. If you've ever seen sparks or gaffers walking around on traditional sets, or even still today, you'll see them carrying gloves. One of the reasons they carry gloves, among many other things, is the lights get really, really hot and it's not safe to touch. So dealing with tungsten lights is still actually quite fun to work with. A lot of DPs choose to work with tungsten because of this sort of slightly more old school feel to them. They have a really nice quality, which just isn't fully matched by LEDs. But they do have their drawbacks as well. Next up, we've got HMIs. This light does still exist around a lot today, and primarily because of its high output. You can get a really, really high output out of an HMI, which we're starting to match now with LEDs, but we're not quite at that point yet. There is still a lot of drawbacks with HMIs. You can only dim them down to about 50%, and even as you dim them, it can change the color temperature a little bit. Striking them can take a very long time, so to actually get the light to emit a source can take quite a long warm-up time. Again, they have a very high power draw, so there's a few disadvantages there. The big place for HMIs, they have a much cooler color temperature, so they're much closer to daylight than tungstens. Tungstens are much warmer, but the place for them today is primarily as a high output fixture. Next up, we've got fluorescent lights. You'll find these primarily as tubes. I've got some domestic ones over top of me. Problem with using domestic fluorescent lights is they can have quite a low color rendition, so they can look quite poor on a human face. They'll give either a green or magenta shift, and they can sometimes have a flicker that, unless you get your settings particularly correct in camera, it can create an on-camera flicker. High quality film fluorescent lights are great though. They are a bit fragile, but you can create a beautiful image. Finally, we've got everyone's favorite LEDs. This is the greatest invention we've had since sliced bread. The biggest letdown of LEDs is the cost. The cost per output is still relatively high. This is coming down year after year, but at the moment, if you want the brightest light per money, LEDs still isn't quite your best option. But you do have so many perks for that one main disadvantage. You can control it over Wi-Fi. A lot of the time you can control on an app or a remote. You can dim down to 10% without affecting the color. They are very portable. They can run off battery. They can run off domestic outputs. You can just plug them into the wall, and there's so much flexibility and versatility that comes through with LEDs. They can exist as a chip on board light or as a tube. You can really morph them into whatever you want. And that draws us nicely onto our face types.